Welcome to another episode of Jadu Lifestyle, where you get a life and live it too. Today we have a business expert, Mr. CONRAD TARTE, on with us. We're going to kind of interview him a little bit to pick his brain and find out what and who he helps and how he does it. But before I go into asking him questions, I want to share a little bit about how I know him. When I first started my practice for body work, I was introduced to Conrad as a business help, a business advisor. And I wanted to see how I could get help because I really wanted, I thought I had something different and I wanted to help people with it. He gave me one piece of advice. Now, the first year, my income, I just started business, so it was probably about maybe $12,000 or so. And he gave me one piece of advice, and the next year, my income went above $75,000. And I'm sure you want to hear what that piece of advice is. So let's welcome Conrad
Good
on
morning,
our
Toddy.
show.
Good
Hi,
morning, Toddy.
good morning. So, how are you?
Well, I'm good. Thanks for having me on, and I hope I can shed some light on some of the experiences that you had and also what I see going on in the business world today.
Okay. Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I don't like to, it's easier said than done when you come to bragging about yourself, but I've actually been in the business world for over 40 years. And
Mm-hmm.
I'll just give you a little snippet of how I got into this field
Mm-hmm.
and why I do what I do. Back in the 70s when I started my business doing advisory work, it's kind of a long story, but I'll give you sort of a little uh, basis of where I came from. I actually started out doing real estate tax consulting. Now, what's so strange about that is during that period of time, there was not a lot of business going on in the U.S. the way we see it today. The other thing is, if late in the late 70s, if you may or may not know or remember, interest rates were so high that many people who wanted to buy or invest in real estate couldn't do it. They just couldn't borrow the money because mortgage rates were in the 18% range, and it was really unaffordable for most people. Well, during that period of time, I was struggling a little bit like most people do in business. And even though a lot of investors were looking for the tax advice, it always never was quite enough to make it a successful business. So I started to search out for other companies and marketing firms that could probably help me sort of refine my business and help me redirect my focus to maybe help me bring in more business. Well, what happened was there were some firms out there that would do that for us. And the problem with that was that they would charge so much money that I felt there's no way I could even afford to even hire these people, let alone stay in business, because the amount of money I would have to borrow was astronomical. I mean, it just was unbearable. So I said, there's got to be another way to do this. And as I started to look out and search around, I began to realize that there was a lot of people who were in business who were successful. And I started to talk to them and was trying to pick their brain as to how they did it. And one of the things that I learned, which was kind of frustrating for me, was that a lot of them had Ivy League school credentials. A lot of them had a lot of family and friends they were connected to. Many of them had a lot of alumni that they were connected to. Or some were married to a business where a spouse was connected or there was a family business involved or something of that nature. So for the startup, it was pretty much unavailable. And Toddy, I think that was one of the things that you and I discussed in the early stages of your business,
Well,
which kind of,
let's talk a little bit about us, my business, for instance. When I approached you, you at first said that you didn't work with my profession, and that kind of threw me a little bit because it's like somebody asking me to or refusing me to join their church. But tell me what it is you look for in a business because you did eventually take me on as a client. So what what did you see, or what are you looking for? Things like that.
Well, it was kind of unique in the beginning because we spent a lot of time talking back and forth about your business. And what I meant that I didn't take on your type of business was that I really hadn't had a lot of experience with the type of business you were in. And not that I didn't want to take you as a client, I just didn't want to take you on and fail. I wanted to make sure that if we took you in, we wanted to make sure we were going to make things happen for you. But there was something very unusual about you, which is not so strange, but you had a background which to me lent itself to success. And if I could, I'd like to just spend a minute or so just talking about that a little bit because I think it's very important for the person starting a
Okay.
business. You came from a background where you were dependent, or I should say you had other people that were dependent on you. You had people that you were sort of responsible for, like your siblings and your parents. And when you grew up, you were sort of like the one they went to when they needed support or help. And I got the impression from you after speaking with you after a period of time that you felt comfortable enough talking to me about your background. Because believe it or not, a lot of people don't like to discuss a lot about their backgrounds, where they came from. But it was very clear to me that you were a business survivor. And what I mean by that was that you didn't have another choice. You were either going to make this business work or you were going to fail completely, and it was going to be very miserable for you. And so when we got to the point where we realized that you had a lot of obligations on your own, you had bills to pay, and you were still sort of supporting your family, you made it very clear to me that this was a do or die situation. You're either going to make this work or you're just going to give up and go somewhere else. And that gave me I'm going to say the insight, but it was very helpful for me to determine that you were going to make this work one way or another. The only thing we had to do with you was to change your mindset a little bit, because for you it was a little bit of a challenge because when you're responsible for one or two people, that's one thing. But now when you're responsible for 40, 50, 100, 200, 300 clients, that becomes a whole nother ballgame. And whether or not you feel you can handle that, a lot of people may say they have good intentions, they could handle it. When it comes down to the nitty gritty, they can't, because it's a tremendous responsibility to take care of your clients. But with you, it was very clear that you weren't going to let that happen. And that was kind of what sold me on you.
Well, definitely. I migrated from my country at the age of 25, and my mother depended on me to support the family while I was here. So I guess their thoughts were, you move to America and everything just flourishes. But I kind of gave a little bit of teaser when I started that said, saying that you gave me one little piece of advice that really changed. And I know definitely my last episode I talked about mindset as being one of the most important things. But do you remember that piece of advice that you gave
Well,
me?
I remember some of the things we talked about. And one of the things I used to beat you on all the time, excuse the expression, was what is it about your business that is so different and so unique that others would want to do business with you? And
Well,
you didn't have an answer for
we
that.
talked about that, but the piece of advice that you gave me, I will refresh your memory. You asked me how many clients I wanted to see a week, and I said, well, I want to see 25. I think 25 is going to be, the magic number for me not to kill my body, but to be able to still help people. And you said, go get 25 clients a week and then come back and talk to me.
I
Do
remember
you
that.
remember that?
Oh, I do. That was more
Yeah.
on the financial part of it. There was things in the beginning that we talked a lot about, but this was one area where we're starting now to get to the point where let's see if the numbers are going to make sense for you and whether or not this business could succeed financially. And that was the crossing point right there. And the funny thing is you went out and did it.
Well, that's the thing. The reason I did it is because to me, I felt like it was a challenge. Okay, you told me to do something and I know I could do it. So I went. And you know what? The other thing that you told me that, and my audience really is a lot of business owners. So I'm going to bring this up, even though it may not be probably part of the conversation we had hoped to have. But you told me to go find the 25 clients, but you also taught me how to do it without paying a cent for advertising. And at that point where I was just starting, it was very important to be able to be successful without having to put out a lot of money. So, was that something, or is that something that you look for in businesses, whether they could do it or not do it? How do you determine that?
Well, here's the thing. Statistically, most businesses fail because they don't have enough clients. That's the first
Hmm.
part of the problem. The second problem is there's this misconception out there that if you have a lot of money, you can advertise your way into success. Well, I will tell you statistically, more businesses fail every year than succeed for that specific reason. They don't have enough customers, and they think that all the money in the world is going to make their business successful, and that's just not the case. And what we learned a lot is over the years is that a lot of small businesses, when they get started, they don't have a lot of money. I mean, you try to go
Yeah.
walk into a bank and tell them you want to borrow $100,000 to start your business, they're going to laugh at you. Unless you have a huge track record, you have a lot of assets, they can't help you. So for the average startup entrepreneur, they have to use whatever resources they have available, but protect those assets for as long as they can. So one of the things that we look at many times is how can you get customers without spending a whole lot of money in marketing? If it's a type
Well,
of business where you have to spend a lot of money, we may have to rethink the approach. And what we
yeah.
do is we put a plan together for you to do that.
What I want to add to that is that at the point in time, that was so important to me because in my industry, we don't get loans. No matter how long you've been in the business, you really don't get loans. Now we have businesses that are offering loans for my kind of industry, but you still have to have a record and you still have to have a certain amount of income. And with my industry, it's very difficult. Coming back to that uniqueness that you talked about earlier, I had to it took me 12 years to develop my technique that I have now and I could use to help people. But you have to come up in my industry, you have to come up with something not different, but something that brings results. And I think every industry is like that. But in my industry, especially, you have to have something that brings results because most clients will complain that they went to this therapist, the other therapist, and they keep searching until they could find what they call a good therapist. And so for me, I had to make sure when I touched my client the first time, I had to bring them back. I had to get results to bring them back. So I guess I could say thank you for the advice you gave me because it helped me to really build my business. I've been in business now for 22 years doing the same thing. I've just added a little bit more to it, and that's what we had talked about also. So let's talk a little bit about, do you see how do you see the business growing to expansion, or do you tell the business owner, well, this idea is probably not going to work? Do
Yeah,
you?
that's one of the Yeah, I was just going to add, this is one of the biggest areas that a lot of businesses fail in the beginning, and it's they really don't have a clue. And it's not because they haven't done their homework. Sometimes they have, but they don't really see the the light at the end of the tunnel. They don't see the distance they can bring their business because they haven't studied the market clear enough, or they haven't really gotten to the point where they understand who their customers are. And until you can identify that and you can really see what services and products you can bring to your customer, you're kind of floundering around. And a lot of times, by the time you become successful, it's a little bit too late. So we spend a lot of time on that. We will go do a lot of brainstorming back and forth to try to figure out, okay, first of all, what are you offering? Who's your customers? And number three, is it a product or service that your market can use? Because without
I
that, it's a sort of a crapshoot.
I remember one fight we had where you said not everybody is your client, and I said everybody is my client, and you had to like you talked about, get my mindset to view that because to me everybody needed pain relief. but your next